Welcome back to the Dylan Shea channel. Today we're talking about something special happening at Newcastle to the point where people are actually thinking they can finish inside the top four. And they have good reason to. They are currently occupying those spaces, as you can see by the Premier League table. You can see they're currently in the Champions League places, and here it sort of does them an injustice because I'm comparing them against Tottenham, Arsenal and Man City, three teams who have picked up a lot of points and played well this well. Maybe not Spurs, but Arsenal and Man City anyway, are playing excellent football and getting a lot of points. So for Newcastle to be in that mix shows how good they really have been this season. And let's be honest, who would have had Newcastle in this position at the start of the season? I don't think anyone, really. They are having a really impressive season, Newcastle United. They got the best defence so far in the Premier League, only conceding 10. They've got the third best goal difference as well with a plus 14. And they also have the least amounts of losses, joined with Arsenal and Man City on 1. Having a record of played 13, won 6, drew 6, lost 1. Becoming a very difficult team to beat. Before we get into Newcastle's season so far and how far I think they can go, let's talk about Eddie Howe, the manager, because that is where it all starts. Eddie Howe has achieved great things in his career. They sort of don't get the recognition that he deserves. He sort of feels like an old toy. Well, he did for a little bit, like an old toy. And sort of the new managers, Arteta, Frank Lampard, Steven Gerrard, Graham Potter, came in, and he sort of got forgotten about for a little while when he's actually a really talented manager and probably at the top of that list. Let's not forget he took Bournemouth out of League 2 to League 1, got them promoted. Not just that, took them to the Championship. Not just to the Championship either, won the Championship, meaning they got obviously promoted to the Premier League. And then he was in the league for 5 years, 4 seasons in total, finishing 16th, 9th with Bournemouth, by the way, 12th, 14th and 18th in his last season in the Premier League at Bournemouth. But people tend to forget this great period that he had there and in the Premier League, just because he got relegated with a relegation side. He saved Bournemouth when they were in League 2, when they were 17 points off of safety. Remind you of something? When Eddie Howe came in at Newcastle, 11 games had been played in the Premier League under Steve Bruce, and Newcastle had won 0 games. Newcastle looked lethargic, they looked unfit, they looked lack of confidence, and they were sort of just relying on St. Maximin and Callum Wilson. They would rely on St. Maximin running 60 yards with the ball, dribbling past about 6 players, and relying on Callum Wilson to magic something up, a goal from out of nowhere. They were winless in Eddie Howe's first 3 games as well. This was just him setting his standard on the squad, really. Everyone goes through a tough period. There was no manager bounce, and I think that shows, well, the quality of the players that he had. But no team has ever survived in the Premier League with 0 wins in 14 games. First manager to do so is Eddie Howe. I honestly think if he had finished 16th last season with that Newcastle side after not winning in their first 14, then it would have been a good season. They would have stayed up and they could have built. But they didn't just do that. They excelled for the rest of the season. They actually managed to finish 11th in the Premier League. In fact, since Eddie Howe took over, they're actually 6th in the Premier League. You can see he's only 3 points behind Chelsea, who have spent billions on their team, or millions, hundreds of millions. Same as Manchester United. Think of how much money has been spent on that team. Think of Arsenal as well, and he's only 11 points off of them. An amazing job he's done at Newcastle, and I think he's proved and proven that he is one of the best managers in the Premier League. Well, he has spent a lot of money, and some people do say this about Eddie Howe. Well, if you've got the players, then of course he's going to do well. But doesn't that also mean that, like, Pep gets no credit? Then Klopp should have no credit for what he's done in the past. Mourinho, all these great managers. Alex Ferguson always had the best players. Does that mean that they get no credit? Also, should we not find it impressive that every single signing has worked under Eddie Howe? Usually there's a flop here or there, but there hasn't been. The only one I'd say you could suggest has been a flop-ish is Chris Wood, but did anyone have any expectation towards him? And he's even scored a couple of goals for Eddie Howe. I mean, Dan Burn, Matt Targett, Bruno Trippier, Isaac, Botman, Pope. I mean, every single one of them has worked. And most of them are quality players. But for me, he's getting the most out of these players. And Matt Targett and Dan Burn have definitely improved at Newcastle to what they were at Aston Villa and Brighton. And I do admit, this Newcastle team is now a good team. You look at Trippier, Bruno, St. Maximin, Callum Wilson, they've got Isak, Nick Pope and Botman. It's a good team. I think a lot of people had them probably the team to push on to that top 6, but for them to be 4th in the Premier League right now, you can't say it's not an overachievement, or his time at Newcastle in full is definitely an overachievement. Every single player at Newcastle has improved. I look at Shah, I think he's improved. He even got the best out of Lascelles last season. You look at Willock, who I thought was declining under Steve Bruce, not really making an impact. He looks a lot better now. And even he's getting Ryan Fraser to look decent. I mean, that is like magician type shit. Let's talk about 2 players in particular. Am I in a parallel universe? Or has Miguel Almiron turned into Iron Robin? Turns out the Paraguayan has a wand of a left foot. He is one of the most informed players in the Premier League right now. He's got 6 goals in his last 6. He's got 7 in total in the Premier League, which is, averaging a goal more than once every 2 games. Unbelievable. I cannot believe what's happened to Almiron. He has about 3 goal of the month contenders. I think the only person who's done that in history, is like Matt Letizia or Dennis Bergkamp. I think you have to put respect to him, for improving as much as he has. You can just hear this image, can't you? You can just hear it. Wow, it's backfired. Because I guarantee Pep would take Miguel Almiron over Jack Grealish right now. Although it was funny at the time. And he was actually right at the time. But Almiron's just stepped it up. Let's talk about Joe Linton. This has to be surely the greatest ever turnaround from a player in football history. The only one I can think of is like Iwobi lately. But it's nowhere near as good as Joe Linton. Because that guy was mocked. People were taking the piss out of him every week. The price tag, 40 million. He didn't score. He didn't look like a football player. He looked terrible. And now he's a key player in the Newcastle team, in a team that's going for the top 4 at the moment. Again, you have to say well done to him, to have that professionalism to turn his career around. There's plenty of players who would have just given up on their career at that point. But when you're comparing him to other players, not just in the Prem, not at Newcastle, in the world, his stats are very, very impressive. He's top 9% for tackles, top 5% for blocks. He's in the top 5% for clearances. He's also in the top 18% for dribbles completed, becoming an all-rounded midfielder and like a destroyer in that Man City, in that Newcastle side. So these 2 players for me are the most improved players at Newcastle, not just at Newcastle, in the Premier League as well. Just an incredible turnaround for both of them, and one of the reasons why this Newcastle turnaround has been so special. Before we get into Newcastle's chances of getting top 4, there's 2 players I have to talk about in terms of elevating a football club. Kieran Trippier and Bruno Fernandes. Now these are 2 very important transfers for Newcastle and the Premier League. This is sort of like Man City's Robinho signing. It's that sort of level, but actually better because these 2 have proper worked. These 2 have completely changed Newcastle entirely. I am a Spurs fan and I always liked Trippier. I thought he was very good. He had a good career at Spurs. But that last season in 18-19, oh my God, he was terrible. I don't know what happened, because in the 2018 World Cup, before that season, he was England's best player, I thought, in that World Cup. Of course, we had that creation moment as well. And his career was only going like this, but then he had that season with us, his last season at Spurs. And yeah, there's a reason why it was the last season. Terrible defensively, so many goals came from our right side. Going forward, his consistency completely dropped, didn't have the same quality he'd had in previous seasons. The move away for him was good. And yeah, to Atletico Madrid as well, where it's somewhere you go in to improve defensively. I think it was a great move for him. I also think the move to Newcastle was so smart from him, coming back to the Premier League the Premier League's basically the Super League at this point. It's by far the best league in the world. And, he came back and in a Newcastle side that he knows he's going to be part of for ages because he's the best player in that team. Well, maybe apart from Bruno Guimaraes, the other player who I'm going to talk about. And to a project that is inevitably going to be challenging for titles as well. So there are chances for silverware for him. And he's been unbelievable at Newcastle. That Trippier in the last season at Spurs, not the same human being. He is completely different. More of a captain, more of a leader now. He's one of the best in the Premier League at free kicks, at set pieces in general. He's getting loads of assists, and for me, I think he's been the best right back in the Premier League this season, and actually since he came back. I think overall he's been the best right back. Now, to me, this signing, Bruno Guimaraes, is what made me realise the Premier League is basically the Super League at this point, because this is a player that was, I think, playing in the Champions League, or might have just got knocked out and playing Europa League. But it's a Champions League quality player, playing in a team that usually gets Champions League football. And he's come to like 15th place Newcastle, they were at the time. Yeah, and he's been amazing. Such a complete midfielder, can play as a 6, an 8, a 10. Going forward, he's absolutely brilliant as well. Can play in the deep line playmaker, but can also play as a box-to-box midfielder too. Just to show how complete he is, he's in the top 12% for non-penalty goals per game, which is 0.24. This is comparing him against midfielders all across the world. He's also in the top 11% for dribbles completed per game, top 2% for tackles. You know, you wouldn't expect a player with that much quality on the ball to be completing that many tackles, which is 3.5 per game. He's also in the top 7% for blocks. He's just a workhorse midfielder who's a brilliant passer, who gets assists, can play as a deep line playmaker, but can also go forward and score goals, and can shoot from outside the box. Just a complete midfielder. When I think of how far Newcastle can go, you know, I'm looking at the teams around them. You look at Arsenal and City, they look really strong. I can't see Newcastle competing with them. Spurs aren't playing well, but are getting a lot of points. And I do think Spurs will improve as the season goes on in terms of their performances. I look at Chelsea, they just lost 4-1 to Brighton. So they're still inconsistent. Look at Liverpool, they have been awful. Almost feels an injustice to compare Newcastle and Liverpool at this moment in time. Liverpool are there with the Brentfords at the moment, and the Palaces, and the Fulhams of the world. Man United have improved a lot under Eric Ten Hag, playing some good football and getting very good results too. So it's tricky to think of what, in this, out of all these teams, where Newcastle will finish. I do think they will be in that realm of Chelsea, Man United, Liverpool, and then Newcastle. I think the top three, I think that will be the top three this season. Man City, Arsenal and Tottenham, and then you'll have this 4 battle going on here. What I would say is I think Newcastle are the most settled out of all of these teams, which gives them a great chance of getting, top 4. I do think if they were to get top 4, it would require a monumental effort. These players would have to continue playing to the level they're at, and I don't know if they are that good, that consistent to do it over a full season. What I would say is the home form in the Premier League, in any league, is huge, and Newcastle United are great at home. The last time they lost at home was a 1-0 loss to Liverpool in April, and then before that was a loss to Man City on December the 19th. And since that loss at home to Man City in December, they've played 17 games at home, winning 11, drawing 5, losing 1, and that loss to Liverpool. So this just shows how difficult they are to beat at home, and this would have to continue, I think, if they were to get top 4, which I do think it will. I think if I had a bold prediction, I said on a couple of videos ago, I think Newcastle will go undefeated at home this year. I think the crowd is too together, the club's too together at home for someone to go there and get 3 points. I do think there will be a bit of a dip, not a massive one, because Eddie Howe's been extremely consistent. His side has been really consistent since he's been there. There hasn't been a dip yet. I think there'll be a tiny one. I think they'll finish 5th, 6th or 7th, one of them positions. I don't know who will get top 4, but I don't think it will be Newcastle. But they will be in that realm for me of those 4 teams. And I'm looking forward to see who can pinch that top 4 spot. Let me know where you think Newcastle will finish. Do you think they'll finish in the Champions League? Do you think they'll finish in one of the other European competitions, the Europa League or Europa League 2 like I do? Or do you think they'll go towards mid-table and they'll have a big dip? Let me know. Subscribe to the channel if you are new as well. Give this video a like if you have enjoyed it, and subscribe if you are new for more videos. And my voice is going. And thank you for watching.